Okay, so here's the beat. No, wait, no. Let's start earlier than the beat. I'm going to share one of my favorite jokes with you, and a joke needs to be set up properly, so let's back this up. Been There, Dan That is an adventure... Oh, and spoilers ahead. Been There, Dan That is an adventure game, and boy, howdy, is it an adventure game. Like, it's an adventure game where the main characters have posters of famous adventure games on their living room wall and a chalk outline of the LucasArts logo in their hallway that they refer to as the death of the adventure game. The characters crack jokes about their tendency to describe game objects out loud, their love of combining two inventory items to make a third, and how adding to your inventory is not technically stealing. It's an adventure game and everybody knows it. The characters know it, you know it, and the game knows you know it. And that's all amusing enough if you're on the game's wavelength. I confess, even as a person who caught basically every reference the characters made, I wasn't exactly slapping my knees over any of it, but it was all good-natured enough that I kept playing. The premise is that you play Ben and Dan, two British indie game developers who are cartoon versions of the game's own designers. And after a very Indiana Jones-y cold open, the plot begins when you, presumably unlike the game's designers, get abducted by space people and are left in a cold metal spacecraft to solve a series of knowingly contrived lock and key puzzles. There's a hallway full of doors, and each door can be unlocked by fitting an object of a specific shape into a panel on the side of the door. Each door opens into an alternate dimensional version of England. There's Lava England, Dinosaur England, England is part of America England, and housed inside each dimension is a number of inventory items and adventure game puzzles that yield inventory items, and each inventory item either unlocks a door or factors into a puzzle that yields an item that unlocks a door. So in other words, you progress through the game by throwing arbitrary doodads at arbitrary roadblocks, which lead to more arbitrary doodads. These are stereotypical adventure game puzzles with most of the narrative justification stripped away. There's no real world building to any of these dimensions, they're all just gags. And it's later revealed that the aliens just put you on this ship to keep you busy while they executed a more elaborate plan. There's no meaning to any of it. You just do it to do it. Again, your mileage will vary on how entertaining you find any of this. My reaction to the early going was that it passed the time inoffensively. One of the doors needs to be opened by something in the shape of a cross, and one of the first dimensions you travel to is a zombie-infested hill with a church. The church is empty, but a fairly basic puzzle reveals a hidden stairway to the basement where you find a priest trying to outlive the apocalypse, and he has a wooden cross. When you ask him if he'll give it to you, he says no, because it's his only remaining symbol of Christianity. But when you go back upstairs, you find a great big Bible on a lectern, which you pick up and bring back down to him. And then, like you do, you drag the item from your inventory and onto the priest. Pretty basic. Now, at least if you're me, what you're expecting, narratively, is to trade the Bible for the cross, which mechanically means you're expecting the game to utilize an item from your inventory, trigger an animation, and make a new item available for your inventory, with maybe some lines of dialogue exchanged. And mechanically, that is exactly what happens, but narratively, this happens. And that's where I lost my shit. I mean, it did exactly what you asked it to do, right? It utilized an inventory item, triggered an animation, and made a new item available for your inventory. You can't complain. All right. So before we get into it, let's say a couple of things up front. A, spontaneous cartoon violence isn't actually that clever. And B, explaining a joke never makes it funnier. With that said, let's explain the joke. Because whether or not you think it's a good joke, it is a neat joke, and it deserves to be dissected. Let's talk about language. The basic unit of a typical adventure game is, and kind of always has been, the sentence. In the early games, it was the sentence you typed into your parser, and later it was the sentence you constructed from a list of nouns and verbs. But starting around the mid-90s, the sentences got a bit more iconographic. We commonly have pictographs now, the basics being hand, eyes, and mouth. So now, instead of entering a sentence like inhale helium, it's mouth plus balloon, which we infer means inhale helium, even if the sentence doesn't actually appear on screen.
Oh, that's made my voice sound funny.
And most of adventure gameplay is this. Whether the sentence is typed, built, or implied, your job is connecting the right verbs to the right nouns, finding the right sentences to progress. Inasmuch as adventure games have core gameplay, the construction of the sentence is the bulk of it. Now, once your sentences are built with icons instead of text, a lot of their meaning has to be inferred from context. But we're actually pretty good at this, because inferring from context is already a big part of language. We know that dragging an inventory item onto a game object means use, where dragging it onto a character means give, in the same way that we can tell contract from contract based on the surrounding words in the sentence. Context. But this can leave some ambiguity, where you aren't sure whether dragging a gun onto a person will mean show gun to man, give gun to man, or shoot man, and good design means giving you enough cues that you make the right assumption, and bad design is just bad design. So what's so clever about this joke is that it takes advantage of the ambiguity. The game knows full well that you meant give Bible to priest, but willfully misinterprets your sentence in order to goose you. Oh, you meant bash him over the head, right? It's a pun. It's a dad joke. It's knowing what you meant and pretending you meant something else. It's the adventure game equivalent of that old line, time flies like an arrow, fruit flies like a banana. Or for a more contemporary joke, where's my fucking jacket, over there next to your regular one. Most of the other jokes in the game you could call noun and verb jokes. You connect silly nouns to silly verbs and they make silly sentences. But the grammar is still perfectly normal. The contents are what's funny. The text and the music and the animations. But for the most part, the mechanics themselves are standard. But here, the designers use the mechanics to tell a joke. It's not just a pun on the language of the sentence, it's a pun on the language of game design. And that's what impressed me. I once read someone describe this as the difference between a lolcat and a doge. Lolcats have mostly normal sentences with silly spelling, while a doge has mostly normal spelling but broken syntax, where the modifiers so, such, and very are meant to modify adjectives, nouns, and adverbs, and you intentionally scramble the parts of speech they get paired with. Which doesn't mean that a doge is, as a rule, funnier than a lolcat, just that it involves a more complicated distortion of English. Many people making doge macros couldn't tell you what the rules are, they only know them intuitively. But it's a sophisticated intuition. You have to, at least on a gut level, have a reasonable understanding of language in order to break it in this way, and expect the same understanding of your audience if they're to get the joke. The bummer is that the jokes in Been There Dan That are never that clever again. From here on out, they're all noun and verb jokes, with the exception of the 3 times they tell this same joke again, each with diminishing returns. There's also only 2 women in the entire game, and they look like this, so nah. But I still hold this one joke up as one of the cleverest jokes I've ever seen in a game. Is it a good joke? Well, that's up to you. But it's a smart joke. One that has to fully understand how adventure games work in order to make them fail humorously. And especially, it's a joke you could not tell in any other medium.